Let me introduce the third speaker or the fourth speaker and the third presentation of this morning panel, Zsuzsa László, who is a curator and researcher of the Artpool Art Research Center of Budapest, and she is also the member of the editorial board of the Art Margins Online, and she is even the board member of the Transit Hungary. Zsuzsa researches primarily transnational exhibition histories, artistic archives, and cultural transfers, and she edited, authored, and organized several volumes and research projects and exhibitions around these topics. And her presentation will discuss the activities of the recently passed away László Beke, to whom memory is this conference today is also dedicated.
Thank you. In 1978, Nick Waterlow, the curator in charge of the third edition of the Sydney Biennial, titled European Dialogue, visited Budapest and agreed with the art historian László Beke that he would assemble an informative exhibit that includes documents and original works and covers the practice of several Hungarian artists. Beke solved this puzzle and escaped the burdensome role of a national consulate by inviting only his friends, but not only from Hungary, but from 4 other countries. Oh, sorry. You cannot. So, anyway. No, it's not that important. I just wanted to show the list of artists without reading all the names. So he called these artists his friends, even if he had never met some of them, since, as he wrote in the catalogue, yes? So, he wrote in the catalogue, "For me, friendship means common fate that is a kind of love, euphory, torture, base hostility, but first of all, fatal synchronicity." How come that Beke felt entitled to step beyond the role of a national representative and attempt to mediate the achievements of some artists with whom he could mostly communicate in letters written in broken English, German, or French? This is a long story, and I will now only show 3 snapshots from this. It all started in the late 60s when Beke had the whimsical idea to take some classes in Slovak language in addition to his art history studies. He was searching for means to transcend the regional isolation caused by the linguistic dissimilarity of Hungarian language, as well as the historical burdens of monarchy, Trianon, and the diplomatic friendships enforced by the Warsaw Pact. Later, as a research fellow of the art history at the Research Institute of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, Beke participated in several institutional expeditions to socialist countries. On such occasion, he befriended the bilingual Slovak-Hungarian art historian and critic Thomas Strauss. Strauss belonged to a previous, as Beke called, reform communist generation, like Lajos Németh, who connected Beke with him. This generation of intellectuals wanted to modernize socialist art, and when it did not succeed, became more or less dissident, and thus turned increasingly towards the newest neo-vanguard tendencies. In addition to the theoretical questions renewing Marxist aesthetics, like the one on the specificity of artistic knowledge and thinking, Strauss published on themes that created overlaps between national cultures, such as constructivism in Central Eastern Europe. Strauss became Beke's most important informant about the Czechoslovak scene and a source of inspiration how to utilize the Marxist sociological vocabulary of art theory to interpret and legitimize avant-garde and conceptualism in socialist countries. Strauss, in his 1970 study, Art as the Anticipation of Social Reality, reacting to a state-organized interdisciplinary futurological proceedings, argued that progressive art is not a reflection on the not a reflection on the synchronous reality, but by its essence, the anticipation of the social tendencies of the future. This essay was published in Hungarian in 1972 in the Journal of Soviet Art History by Beke's mediation, as evidenced by their correspondence. Strauss started out from the Marxist question how art can have an effect on reality, and from Engels' famous statement that he learned more from Balzac about economic principles than from economists. He also referred to Ernst Bloch's concrete utopia, and most importantly, avant-garde's rejection of the past and the present and its orientation towards the future. Strauss also pointed out that avant-garde's most important innovators like Malevich, Kassák, Moholy Nagy, or József Vidra did not come from the most developed Western centers, but from the economically lagging behind Russia or Central Europe, or East Central Europe. They were all internationalists, opposed to the nationalism of 19th century art and rebellious anticipators of socialism. This resonated profoundly with Beke's thinking. His first contribution to neo-avant-garde art events was a short text for an important group show exhibition R in 1970, in which he described an apocalyptic future vision. Accumulated artworks flood the urban spaces, and only abstract signs can catch the attention of the public. In 1973, on the occasion of a similar academic futurology conference, Beke developed further his seniors' arguments and applied them to conceptual tendencies, and particularly to his 71 Imagination project that collected documents of artistic imagination. Beke followed Strauss's sociological theoretical phraseology and seized upon Marx's idea on the radical democratization of arts, advocating a critical understanding of futurology and interpretation of avant-garde as a realism of the future. The idea that art can make a headway into the future, solve unsolvable problems, and instigate social changes was turned into practice at small scale during the friendly meeting of Czechoslovak and Hungarian artists in György Balántai's Balatonbognár Chapel studio, discussed by many of you, but I now try to have a different look at on it. So Strauss assisted Beke to organize the meeting and mediated between him and various artists, groups of artists in Bratislava. Finally, Strauss did not participate in the meeting, most probably because he was already under police surveillance. His absence conferred the role of mediating between the different groups of artists to Beke. The photos of György Galántai, this is to show, he made a list of people to invite and also which language they speak, so he can write in that language to them. Yes. So the photos of György Galántai show the eagerness of the participants to communicate with each other, transcending the barriers posed by the lack of a common language equally understood by everyone. Beke prepared collective installations and actions that primarily aim to address the envisioned communication difficulties. He brought dictionaries and collected and invited all the participants to collect triads of Czech, and Hungarian words that are similar and mutually comprehensible. The linguistic nature of conceptual art posed a barrier to international artistic communication, especially in Eastern Europe, and even more so for Hungarian artists. Artists started to translate their works to English, or more rarely to German or French, and attempted to create ones in the lingua franca of conceptual art. Working in broken English or engaging with translations proved to be, in many cases, an empowering exercise in the region, full of productive misunderstandings and trans-language crosstalk. Beke's proposal at this meeting went beyond these and endeavored to find shortcuts for cross-border communication. He initiated a translation exercise that unearthed forgotten shared vocabularies between the participants' mother tongues. The concepts of cultural transfer, as Michel Espagna and Michael Warner proposed it, refers to exchanges happening between such national cultures that before their process of nation forming were part of one heterogeneous cultural entity, which had to be forgotten so that they can diversify themselves and develop their national identities. On the other hand, national framing of culture was fundamentally challenged and transformed not only by the utopian mission of avant-garde, but also by socialist internationalism. Beke's Czech, Slovak, and Hungarian verse demonstrated what is shared without using a Western language as a mediator and without suppressing the distinctness of the three languages and cultural contexts. Similarly, similarity was not only present in the phonetic form of the words, but also in what elusive contextual meanings the participants tended to assign to these words in the shadow of 1968 events, as Magdalena Radomska already discussed. Works of Greek, Latin, or German origin, action, democracy, demonstration, information, international, collective, concept, protest, bureaucracy, individualism, provocation, repression, or tolerance, are similar in almost all European languages, but had specific connotations for the participants. Whereas more ordinary one-syllable words like free, kiss, stream, hell, glass, lunch, coat, dear, witch, or speech, these are words that were displayed, indicated the early historical context between these cultures. The triadic dialectics of equivalence and difference was also thematized by the exhibited photo series by Miklos Erdély, while Tamás Szentjobbis slogan in Czech, "Help me a bit so that I can help you," the mutual contribution needed for trans-language communication. Beke had two other concepts that were realized as collective actions, entitled Possibilities, most probably inspired by the Czech writer Josef Kroutvor's manifesto of the same title, published in Klaus Groth's Aktuelle Kunst that year, which allowed it to conceptual art as a thought experiment mapping all what may be possible. Krautvor was also among the invited artists, but he could not come finally. The tug-of-war action, was motivated by a perplexing image showing Hungarian soldiers playing tug-of-war before they participated in the Warsaw Pact occupation of Czechoslovakia. The photo was originally published in the US Time magazine, but Beke encountered this image in the 70th issue of a short-lived mail art magazine, Pages, which featured, in addition to a section on recent Czechoslovak activities, a sarcastic montage of art and culture headlines and political military articles and images from the 68 issues of Time magazine. Beke's reenactment tested if the reality of the photographed scene first turned into art traveling through the US magazine and through mail art circuits, then to an art action, annihilating the image, can turn this act back to reality and change actual non-diplomatic but personal relations between the artists involved. In a similar way, the handshake action also tried if the hypocrisy of diplomatic handshakes can be appropriated and reversed in a democratic way, everyone with everyone, and its documentation was processed in a scientific sociological manner as a matrix of all possibilities. Invited artists also prepared open propositions that could be completed by the other. The Czech artist Kocman presented his international assembling love. Jiří Valok distributed a simple shape that everyone could develop further. And Gyula Power invited everyone to create pseudo-works in his behalf. The meeting had a special significance for the Slovak artist Péter Bartos. From the late 60s, he was engaged with ABC triads, used as models for basic forms that can create a community, dislodge binary oppositions, and represent the kinship and distinctness of the nations in the Danube region. He proposed a mediation exercise to listen to each other's invisible and inaudible heartbeats, which he declared dorozumenia, meaning understanding, agreement, and comprehension, but including the word umeni, the word for art too. The momentary gift of tongues experienced by the participants is well manifested by Gyula Power's later account. I almost learned to speak Czech and Slovak, and they almost learned Hungarian. Among the regional exchanges, the Balaton-Boglár meeting is a rare example of empowering trans-language communication, but there are many others that force the participants to move away from the comfort zone of their local milieus and made a serious translation a force to get their message through I don't know if Boris is here, but I'm using communication in relation to translation so many times. I didn't want to rewrite it because I will reconsider, but I think communication can have a broader meaning, just like a very basic sense. But yeah, it was a very useful comment for my paper. So, in April of '72, a couple of Hungarian artists, together with László Beke, traveled to Warsaw with a similar intention to establish personal contacts and initiate artistic collaboration. The occasion for the excursion was the invitation through János Brender, the Hungarian art historian living in Poznan, for an exhibition in the very prestigious Foxal Gallery. Beke got into contact with the gallery even before the exhibition and initiated an exchange of documents, ideas, and manifestos. He got extremely excited by Andrzej Turowski and Wiesław Borowski manifestos, documentation, and living archive published in '71. Documentation was a manifesto against documentation. It called attention to the phenomenon that artistic documentation are achieving an increasingly influential role in the art system, and not only materialize and freeze what is originally live and momentary exercise linked to a situation, but also multiply, spread, and open the work for manipulation in an uncontrollable way. Beke especially appreciated this action when they threw the documentation of Foxal into the sea. And this photo shows this. So, on the other hand, the text Living Archive declared that artistic activities should be isolated from any form of manipulation by the artist or the gallery or the audience. So the best way to secure such an isolation and autonomy is to store them in archives. It was also a manifesto against the program of other Polish galleries, such as Art Laboratory of Galeria L in Elbag, that aimed to make the artistic process accessible and open. Beke, as evidenced by his letter to the galleries, managers got intrigued by this text and wanted to know how they applied these propositions in practice. Beke took the liberty to mention his own archival project, claiming humorously that he himself is a living archive, referring to his imagination collection mentioned earlier, and which he was then aiming to extend into an international scale, but without sharing Borowski's and Turowski's isolationist intention. Quite the opposite, Beke had a keen desire to establish connections and was very excited to discuss these concepts and propositions in Warsaw with Foxal's curators and artists. In the exhibition, Miklós Erdély, György Jovanovics, László Lakner, Gyula Power, Tamás Szentjobi, and Endre Tóth exhibited mostly text and photo-based conceptual works. The exhibits tackled on the challenge of translating a message through different languages, sign systems, and idioms, which in the case of the work of Erdély, Power, and Szentjobi contained direct references to political rhetorics and iconographies that the Foxal Gallery would aim to avoid. After the exhibition, Beke wrote a rather disappointed report on their Warsaw adventure. He reported that they expected to experience an advantage of the more liberal cultural policies in Poland. However, the curator of the gallery suggested changes and made objections to several works of the Hungarian artists. Even more importantly, the Hungarian artists saw that the exhibition would provide them with opportunity to meet and get acquainted with fellow Polish artists, but it did not happen. The exhibition was neither covered by the press. Foxal's institutional critique aimed to free the gallery from the stigma of a state socialist institutional system, as much as I could reconstruct, whereas Beke and the artists he worked with were very much longing for tangible institutions that could support their endeavors and provide legitimacy for local, more contextual versions of conceptualism. Translations not only had their losses, but also their gains. Beke, during his stay in Warsaw, made long-lasting friendships with Turowski and also with Marek Konieczny, a Polish artist who were engaged with practices opposing radically Foxal's isolationism. Beke also exchanged further letters with Borowski and referred to the '72 Czech issue of the Swiss Werk magazine, where both Foxall and Beke published collective statements in collaborations with Urs Graf. Beke's manifesto, titled Concept Art as Possibility of Young Hungarian Artists, can also be read as a polemic against the decontextualization of East European art represented by Foxall Gallery. And it was also published 1 year later in the Hungarian Schmuck. And I just wanted to call attention to this quotation: with the help of these new media appearing as an international language for us, we should like to give informations about our particular problems and results, generally speaking, about our special situation. Between 74 and 77, Beke, in charge of the exhibition program of the Club of Young Artists in Budapest, among other Eastern and Western European artists, invited Jaroslav Kozlovsky, most well known from the NET initiative, but also belonging to the circle of Foxall, in addition to running a gallery in Poznan. Beke shared with the Polish artists their then interest in semiotics, conceptualism, but in connection with art's relation to the social context and historical circumstances, they had different approaches. The work lesson Kozlovsky was to present in Budapest, however, created an intriguing interplay between their approaches. The project used an illustration from an English language book and substituted it with a most probably staged photo of the artist's parents that meticulously translated into photography each element of the original illustration. Kozlovsky, as in a language book, lists similar sentences in the Budapest flyer as well, with a small change pointing to the discrepancy between the different systems of representation. But Magdalena Moskolowicz also already observed this gesture can also be interpreted as a closeted reflection on the challenges of translatability for East European artists. I skip a few things, sorry. So, in 73, in Zagreb, Beke found himself at a similar front line of a similar debate at the Tendencies 5, the last edition of a yearly international exhibition series devoted to technological and constructivist art. Beke became involved in this event since this last edition was designed as a confrontation between conceptualism, constructive visual research, and computer art. For the conceptual section of the exhibition created by Marian Szuszowski, he compiled an assembling entitled Animus Collective. It consisted of paper-based conceptual works of 17 Hungarian artists, mental, visual, verbal operations to be completed by the viewer. As the related OICA symposium, Rational and Irrational in Visual Research, so Beke could form long-lasting alliances with all those who were critical of the conference and the exhibition's polarizing approach, labeling conceptual art as irrational in relation to neo-constructivist and computer-based visual research. In his paper, Beke discussed this confrontation from the point of view of East European art. He argued that conceptual art constructing metalinguistics investigations deals with the unknown, but it also rationalizes it since these investigations can anticipate future social tendencies. Foreshadowing post-colonial critique, Beke suggested that the attribute irrational orientalizes what it is applied to. Half-minute. He stated that East European conceptualism, originating rather from fluxus than minimalism, had a different pathway and more social content than its Western version, even if it does not want to be characteristic of its location. Through its participatory character, it opens the possibility of intervention into the life of society. And really just two more sentences. This statement made him kind of friends and alliance with Nena Dimitrievich, Marian Shushovsky, and many other representatives of new art practices present there. László Beke, 6 years later, when compiling material for the Sydney Biennial, could make a robust statement in relation to several such debates, simply naming his friends, Marek Kozniecki, Pet Stembera, Rasha Todosiewicz, and most importantly, Anna Lupas. And I just wanted to say briefly that it wasn't a successful participation. The Sydney Biennial, they couldn't interpret the works, Beke couldn't travel there. So clearly it was not a breakthrough in mediating East European art to the West, or a moment when peripheries would unite, but an opportunity to form a friendly regional coalition. So with these case studies, I aim to show a road Beke traveled from reform Marxist pursuits of the social legitimacy of conceptualism as futurological realism through emancipating its local idioms to a desired Babel, a network of cross-border, cross-discipline, cross-language friendships, a meta-society in which translation is a way to live together. And sorry for running over the time, but